I'm Sydney, and I used to hate winter until I moved to a place that actually gets snow. And I will say that I like to read all year round, but there's something about winter and there's something about a good snow day that makes you want to curl up with a good book. So I'm going to recommend my favorite winter reads. There aren't going to be any holiday books in here. Ignore the background. Well, I'm gonna break it into 3 sections based on early, mid to late winter vibes. And I feel like that's important because early winter, you're still maybe in the holiday mode. You're maybe still excited about winter and it's still fresh and new and you're looking forward to that first snow. Midwinter, I feel like you're like, okay, the holiday rush is over. I'm hunkering down a little bit, popping those vitamin D tablets. And then the late winter, you're kind of like, all right, I'm maybe appreciating the snow right now. I'm appreciating this, but I am craving spring. And you're kind of in that weird, like, is it gonna be spring soon? Is it not? Kind of era. Maybe craving some warmer weather. Yeah, let's go for it. All right, so early winter, the first recommendation I have is basically anything Agatha Christie. However, my winter favorites are Murder on the Orient Express and The 450 from Paddington. Murder on the Orient Express follows a recurring detective, Hercule Poirot, who is kind of a quirky Belgian detective. Is set on a train that gets snowed in, murder happens on it, and of course, our detective is on the train and has to figure out who the murderer is, and it's kind of a closed room type of murder, like as in, we know the murderer couldn't escape because they're on the train with us. 450 from Paddington features a recurring amateur sleuth, Miss Marple, and basically one of Miss Marple's friends is on a train, glances over at a parallel train that's going about the same speed and witnesses a murder on that opposing train. And I think it's the 450 from Paddington. This friend tells Miss Marple, and Miss Marple does her little amateur sleuthing thing. I like this, not because it's necessarily set in winter, because I do not remember when it's set. However, what I really love about it is that the majority of the story takes place in this huge manor, and it's very much like kind of like the Knives Out type of vibes. Once again, you probably can't do any wrong with Agatha Christie. With Agatha Christie anything. However, these just give snowy day, curl up by a fire vibes to me. So once again, I like murder mysteries this time of year, and my next recommendation is going to be Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. Or is it Jillian? Oh. But this book is perfect for a really overcast day. You got a candle lit, you got a warm drink, you want to have something that feels like a warm hug, but like a hug from someone that said something a little off earlier in the night, and you're kind of like, do I like this person? Or like, what's going on here? Like the vibes are just like slightly off. So this is basically about a woman who's gone missing, and it flips flops from the point of view of her husband, who is currently, I think, the #1 suspect in her disappearance, and kind of going back in time a little bit, going to the point of view of one of her diaries that's leading up to her going missing. If you've seen the movie, the book is better. If you've never seen the movie, go ahead and read the book. It's also one of those books where you're kind of like, you flip-flop between who you're rooting for, which I love. All right, so the next book I'm gonna recommend is a middle grade book, and it's also a murder mystery. I feel like I'm definitely biased this first half of the list, and it's perfect for early winter because this is the closest thing to a holiday book I'm gonna get on this list, and that is Greenglass House by Kate Milford. This story has the ultimate cozy, big, warm house vibes. So this story follows the main character Milo, whose parents run an inn for crooks, basically. They weren't expecting any crooks to show up because I think this is set on like Christmas Eve or something like that. They weren't expecting any crooks to show up. There's a huge winter storm outside, but the doorbell keeps ringing, and one by one, a number of crooks come in. And this whole time, Milo is trying to figure out what the connection is between these crooks, befriends another girl who's there, and they're exploring this house, this huge house that his parents own that used to be owned by another criminal mastermind. I definitely think if you want a quick read, if you want to feel like a kid again, and if you do want some plot, but you're more so just going for vibes right now, I recommend this book. This next book, I'd be surprised if you've never heard of it, by the year of our Lord 2023. And that book is Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin, the first book in the, what the hell is it called? The first book in the Song of Ice and Fire series. Don't judge my little book cover. I got this from Costco when it was first coming out on HBO. The opening scene in this book is set in thick, thick snowfall. You know, and also if you've ever heard of this series, you know that the tagline, "Winter is coming," is a big thing. I have not read all of the books in the Song of Ice and Fire series. I guess no one technically has because it's an unfinished series. I've also never finished watching the TV series, and I really want to because really big fans of this despise the ending, and I kind of want to know why they despise it so much. Anyway, the first book at least is great if you like high fantasy. If you also like a nice little layer of political intrigue. I also feel like just like winter is good for murder mysteries and thrillers, I think it is perfect fantasy season to get lost in a story and to go into another world. The next book I'm going to recommend for early winter is the first book in the His Dark Material series, which is The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman. I think this is a young adult book. I think this is a middle grade, sorry, not YA necessarily. This follows an 11-year-old girl named either Lyra or Lyra, I'm gonna say Lyra, who travels from one end of their universe or whatever to the other to save her friend and her uncle. I recommend this book if you want a series that'll carry you through the winter. I also recommend it if you are okay with kind of books aimed at a younger audience but really gets you going in terms of the overall ambiance. This book was big in the cyberpunk era. Oh no, not cyberpunk, steampunk. Yeah, the steampunk era. Cyberpunk is the video game. I think you should read this for sure. So the next book I'm going to recommend for early winter is Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. This is the first book in a trilogy. It follows Norse Viking mythology. I will admit I had never really read any Norse or Viking fantasy before, but this, and it also made me want to play Assassin's Creed Valhalla, like, so bad. But this book is so good. If you like fantasy, if you like dragons, if you like a tinge of mystery, then this is for you. The Bloodsworn Trilogy, which is what this is the first book of. The Bloodsworn Trilogy follows the footsteps of three people: a huntress on a dangerous quest, a noblewoman who has rejected privilege in pursuit of battle fame, and a thrall who seeks vengeance among the famed mercenaries known as the Bloodsworn. My favorite points of view are the huntress and the thrall. A thrall is basically like a slave or a servant. And once again, this is Norse time, so just kind of have that mental image. Very gripping, very adventurous. Okay, y'all, so the first book I'm gonna recommend for the dead of winter. Like, you are in it to win it. You're popping those vitamin D supplements. It is, you can't look back at fall, you can't look forward to spring, but you're not quite tired of the snow yet. So the first book I'm going to recommend is a horror thriller. I would say more of like a thriller than horror to me. It is Misery by Stephen King. I will admit I'm one of those weirdos who some of my comfort movies include Fargo and Misery. This follows an author named Paul Sheldon. He writes this romance series whose main character is named Misery Misery Chastain. This series has been going on for years and years and years, and he plans to kill off the main character because he's just tired of writing that shit. He gets trapped in the snowstorm and gets found by someone who turns out to be his biggest fan, and her name is Annie Wilkes. Annie Wilkes is his biggest fan, but she's a little wonky in the head and basically holds him hostage while he has an injury from the car accident he gets in the middle of the snowstorm. And she reads that he's going to kill off the main character and keeps him trapped there, basically. I don't think I'm giving too much away. I just recommend it for midwinter when you're kind of like, I am stuck in the middle of this season, if you like thriller and horror. The next book I'm recommend is more horror than thriller to me, and it is The Shining by Stephen King. This is another snowed in type of story, whereas Misery was a lot more thriller and just unnerving, and you're definitely kind of like, you want Paul to get out, you want Paul to get out. The Shining is a lot more psychological, and it's more disturbing than unnerving in my opinion. If you've seen the movie, you get the disturbing undertone. Stanley Kubrick did a hell of a job. The book, is a lot more slow paced. Even though the movie was slow paced, the book is slow paced. And yes, it is a lot more horror than thriller. But once again, another good book if you want to kind of get the snowed in, trapped feeling. I think The Shining is a lot more popular than Misery. I don't know. But I'm just gonna knock those two out, even though this isn't. Yeah, I don't read a ton of horror, but I do like Stephen King. The next book that I'm going to recommend is more on the fantasy tip, and I don't know if it's YA or not. It doesn't read like a YA book to me, but I think it's one of those books where, depending on where you live, you might find it in the YA section, you might find it in the adult section. And that is A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. This follows a magician named Kel who is under hire of the king. And he is one of the few people that can hop between dimensions. There are 3 Londons. There's a gray London, a white London, and a red London. And we're following Kel, who is the official magician for Red London, but he also low-key smuggles things between the Londons or whatever on the side. He notices that there's a shift in the magic and it's becoming a little bit more perilous. I read this maybe a few years ago. It was one of those series where it was really hyped up for a while, and I was like, this is probably overhyped. There's probably not a reason that this many people like it. I was wrong. It was one of those, like, I didn't want to like it, but I did. And I have the first 2 books. I've read the first 2 books. I haven't read the last book. This is a trilogy. And it was a pleasant surprise. I recommend it for folks that like fantasy and can tolerate that little towing the line between YA and adult fantasy. The next book I'm going to recommend, people sometimes put this in a fantasy category, but I think it's more of like a historical fiction. It does read like a fantasy book in terms of tone, but I think it's historical fiction. And that is The Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. This is a thick book. The moment you start reading it, you're like, I wish I was cozied up by a fire. This book is basically about Guy building a church. This is also a book that has multiple perspectives. I don't think it reads first person. I think it's third person, but it still follows multiple perspectives. Yeah, I'm just gonna read the little blurb from this. The Pillars of the Earth tells the story of Philip, prior of Kingsbridge, a devout and resourceful monk driven to build the greatest Gothic cathedral the world has known. Of Tom, the mason who becomes his architect, a man divided in his soul. Of the beautiful, elusive Lady Eliana, haunted by a secret shame, and of a struggle between good and evil that will turn church against state and brother against brother. So this is also set in the 1100s. So that is the time and place that you should prepare for. It is just a really good read. I think it's almost similar in tone to Game of Thrones, where there's some political intrigue, very character driven. I think I would recommend looking up trigger warnings from this book, but I think this is a great winter read. So the next midwinter read I recommend is another murder mystery. And disclaimer, this is one I haven't read yet, but I'm gonna read it this year, I promise. And that is The Honjin Murders by Seishi Yokomiso. This, first of all, what attracted me to this is the cover, because I judge books by their cover, and this is such a beautiful cover. I'm gonna go ahead and read from the back so that I can say this a little bit more succinctly than the other books. In the winter of 1937, the village of Okamura is abuzz with excitement over the forthcoming Ikianagi wedding. But amid the gossip, there is also a worrying rumor. It seems a sinister masked man has been asking questions around the village. Basically, the night of the wedding, there's a murder that happens. There's an amateur detective or amateur sleuth named Kosuke Kindaichi. This author has won a lot of awards and has a whole bunch of other books following this detective. I kind of want this to be my first read out of his series. One, because of the winter time, obviously. I kind of get noir vibes, like film noir vibes. I kind of like the fact that it's in a setting that I'm not used to for murder mysteries. Like, I don't think I've ever read a murder mystery set in Japan. I like the fact that it is a Japanese author writing about Japan. I'm excited to read this. It looks like it would be a nice quick read, something that you could honestly knock out on a snow day with nothing else to do. I'm recommending it to you because I can't wait to read it myself. The next book I'm going to recommend is also a murder mystery, but has also been in the thriller category a few times. I think it has more murder mystery overtones than thriller overtones, but overall perfect for midwinter. And that is The Girl with a Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson. I remember reading this book when it was gaining popularity in the States, and I tried to reread it maybe 3 winters ago. I think it has a good plot, good cast of characters. The setting is perfect for winter because it is in the middle of winter Sweden, set in a really rich mansion. This is another book that you should look up trigger warnings possibly, especially if you're a woman and especially if you're not really a fan of more of the like true crime type of murder mysteries. I think if you read this when it first came out, it's worth a reread. There's so much that I forgot about this and it just screams winter. Okay, so next I am going to recommend late winter reads. Now this is the time of year that you might be a little tired of the snow, a little tired of it being so cold and wet outside. If you do love winter, this is also the time of year where you're just trying to hang on to the last little bits of the winter vibes. But for the most part, you're also kind of like, I could use a little touch of spring. So the first book that I'm going to recommend for this time of year is Outlander by Diana Gabaldon. I think that's how you say her name. First of all, I love this cover. You know what you're going into when you see a cover like this, okay? If you haven't watched the show, haven't heard about it, it is a historical fiction. It does have some fantastical elements to it, but more so it's history fiction romance. It follows Claire, who comes from the 1940s Britain, I think. She and her modern day husband go to Scotland on vacation after the war ends, and she winds up accidentally time traveling to the year 1740 something. Scotland. This is another book that I would look up trigger warnings if you've never seen the show. I feel like Outlander is a good book for folks who love romance, who love historical fiction, or for folks who want a feeling more than a story. The story is good. I feel like I'm poorly selling this, but for me at least, it wasn't like The Shadow of the Gods or whatever, where I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to know what happens next. It was more of like, I'm just here for the vibes and the hot guys. So I feel like my hair is changing as we go on. So the next late winter craving spring book that I'm going to recommend is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. I am recommending this for this time of year because when I think of fairies, I more so think of like spring and summer. However, it is set in the dead of winter. It is also another Scandinavian setting, so if you're into that, then this is for you. It is an easy read. I don't think it's a life-changing read, but it is an easy read. This is also a good book for folks who really like the grumpy sunshine type of vibe, enjoyed the movie Atlantis, people who enjoyed the movie The Mummy. The main character is Emily Wilde, and she is a professor in, I think, more so like the early 1900s, but she's a part of kind of like a niche group of researchers who believe that fairies are real and do studies on them. It also features another professor named Wendell Bambleby, who is more so driven by charisma, more so driven by his personality. He has the similar vibes of that professor from the second Harry Potter, whose name I can't remember, whose scholarly claim to fame more so is coming from writing on the backs of other scholars. They are hunting down a specific type of fae called the Hidden Ones, and they are wanting to learn a lot more about them. Oh, there's also a second book of this out. I haven't read it yet. I don't remember what it's called, but this is yet another like good, I'm bleeding into spring and I want some spring reads. The next book I'm going to recommend for late winter is one of those books that's about books, a book about bookstores, and that is Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore by Robin Sloan. This is another kind of quick read. It's fiction, not really fantasy, although it also has some fantastical elements, less magical and more quirky, mysterious. So this follows the main character Clay, who used to be really big in the tech scene, I think, and just needs a job and happens upon this bookstore, Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore. It is a weird used bookstore, has its own personality, and only has a few people who come in late at night looking for very specific books. And all of a sudden, Clay just happens to stumble upon this mystery. It is really good for people who like riddles, who like, ooh, kind of like treasure hunting vibes. It's really good for folks like that. It's also good for folks who almost like something a little trippy, a little dreamy, a little like people who like secret societies, people who like things that feel like, I can't believe I had this type of day today, but I'm along for the ride. It has that energy to it. Also, I like quirky little titles like this, Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore. And as someone who loves used bookstores and lives really near quite a few here in Chicago, I just feel like I always have strong attachments to stories that are about bookstores that have so much character like that. I also think it's good for this time of year, one, because this is a very bookish time of year, winter, so it's really nice to have books that are about books and about bookstores, but also it's set in San Francisco and kind of in the really rainy season of San Francisco. And I don't know, it just has very quirky, cozy vibes. I think this is for people who like quirky fiction, who like their main characters to kind of be figuring out what the hell to do with their lives, and who really like riddles, really like puzzles, really like secret societies. So I think this is a really nice read. All right, the last book for this late winter vibe is, I think, a middle grade. I think it's like a young middle grade though. And that is Wildwood by Colin Malloy. It also has some illustrations in there. This is a very quirky book. It's set in the Pacific Northwest, so I think it's set in Oregon. It's very fable-y. It is very fairy tale-y. It is about this little girl whose young toddler brother gets snatched up by ravens one day when she's out giving him, taking him a walk in her stroller. And she goes on this adventure to find him in the woods. But yeah, it's very fable-y. It's almost got a more playful undertone, and it's got a kooky cast of characters. It's good for folks who just want something fun, who, heck, if you have kids or kids in your life, this is also the kind of book that I would probably read aloud as their like first chapter book or something like that. I think it's just a really cute read. I think that it's good for fans of stuff like Fantastic Mr. Fox. I think it's good for fans of stuff like Lion the Witch and the Wardrobe. I think it's fun if you kind of like those Pacific Northwest vibes. I think it's also good for people who like adventure, but the type of adventure that like you meet a whole bunch of people along the way and you kind of need those people to get to the next leg of the journey type of energy. The illustrations are really cute. I think that they really pay homage or whatever, homage, I don't know. I think they're really good for that kind of fable energy. I think that they're good for that Pacific Northwest energy. Yeah, I just think it's a really cute read. And I do associate it with more of a late winter read because once again, this is the time of year that you want to be cozied up with a good story, in my opinion, more than just like out and about, or you want an easy read, like that you can read on the beach or something. This is more of a, I still want to be cozied up next to the window or next to a fireplace, and there's still probably a mix of rain and snow outside. It's wet and cold outside. Don't really want to go out there, but I do want the energy of that. I just think that it matches late winter more. That is my list. I feel like it's one of those times where in my head all of these make sense, and I don't think that I have that diverse of taste in books until I have to describe the books, and I'm like, gosh, this is probably hitting a lot of different people at once. I do feel like winter is kind of one of the best times to read, and I think all of these books I recommend because I am someone who is a chronic DNFer, or like I will put down a book if it does not keep my attention, and these are books that kept my attention for either the energy that they brought, the storyline, the characters, the ambiance, whatever. So I like to recommend books like that. The only book that I hadn't read is the Honjin Murders, and I'm excited to read it. Pop those vitamin D supplements, go outside, call loved ones, take care of yourself this winter. But yeah, thanks for hanging out. Good luck on your next read. I'll see you soon. Bye.